However, incorporating the policy aspect of it, whichever way the economy performs or whichever way the economy is going to go is also determined by the policies that have been put in place to ensure that that happens. So that's also where our conversation is going to go. And I'll just have a quick introduction of my panelists. Here, just close to me here, I have Hopo Masundile, who is a business development and participants manager at Comesa Business Council. I'm also joined by Fanuel Kapanje, just next to Hopo. He is the chief finance officer at First Capital Bank. And next to him is Richard Mawarire, the assets and liabilities manager at Stewart Bank. And lastly, definitely not least, Eddie Cross. He's an economist and he is with Africa Online. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on the panel. I'm glad at least I come to balance out the gender equation, at least it gives a bit of balance. Unfortunately, Mr. Batanai Matsika sent his apologies. He won't be making it on this panel discussion. I know it's been a long day. I'll try to stick to time and also allow the audience to ask a few questions. All right, so let's get straight into it, right? As I begin this panel discussion, I did indicate that we are going to be basing it on the survey as well as looking at the policies that have been put in place by different authorities. Richard, I'll start with you. The survey indicates that there is a very low business confidence on the outlook, the economic outlook for 2023. Do you think that this is justified? Do business have reasons to worry?
Thank you. Thank you, Mona Lisa, and thank you to the ZNCC team for this opportunity. I think naturally, it's natural that we expect business confidence to be at its low. I think if we look at the context in which we are operating in, from an operating environment point of view, it's characterized by high inflation. It's also characterized by exchange rate volatility. So you would expect that these factors then feed into the natural expectations of the business people. But however, be that as it may, there are a bit of one or two positive indicators. If you look at the industry capacity utilization, an improvement to 63%. If you look at the level of local production in terms of what we are stocking in our supermarkets, I think a figure was thrown up around for about 80%. So in as much as the business confidence is low, but those are some of the silver linings within an environment which I would say is tough. And also, I think I need to hasten to say that this is not unique to Zimbabwe, because the operating environment, even from an external economic point of view, is volatile, ambiguous, complex, and it's pretty much a VUCA environment. And some of these things are feeding into the local economic landscape. But however, I think in terms of the outlook, without necessarily preempting some of the points that I think I jotted down, in as much as this is set to continue from a volatility point of view, but there are positive points that I think are there for the picking. If you look at the forecasted growth in mining, if you look at the hotel and accommodation, I think it's forecasted to grow at about 53%. If you look at other sectors, I think barring a poor agricultural season, but I think we are about to do so well, especially when you look at our major export earnings like your tobacco. If you look at the wheat subsector, for example, I think a record output. So if going into 2023, I think it is those are areas where I think we should be drawing a lot of inspiration. And with the right policy mix and with the right set of choices from the policy point of view, I would think that 2023 is a bit of hope for us.
All All right, thank you. I'll ask if the microphones can be increased the volume a little bit. I'm not sure if the audience can hear clearly. It sounds a bit low. All right, I'll move on to Eddie. Thank you, Richard. Eddie, earlier on, the ZNCC president, Mike Senegal, spoke about how it is looking up, and he did say some of the issues that we are going through now are a phase that will pass. Would you agree with that?
Do I dare answer that? Look, we have so many problems going forward that it's difficult to make kind of predictions on what's going to happen. I think the economy has performed extraordinarily well in the past 2 years. I think that in 2021, our GDP growth was more like 12% rather than 7%. And I think the minister's estimate for 2023 of 3.8 is way below the potential. I spoke to him on Monday, and I said to him, I thought that he was manipulating the growth rate to limit expectations. And he laughed at me. But the situation, the reality is that if you look going forward, our agricultural industry is in a catastrophic state. We have not planted even a third of our capacity this planting season. Less than half of the irrigated winter crop of wheat has been replanted. And the problem is financial. The government has not sorted out how to fund our new farmers. And until they get to the point where we can finance agriculture properly and on time, I'm afraid agriculture is not going to perform. The minister continues to claim that this was a record wheat crop. He's talking nonsense. We have produced less than half our national requirements, significantly less than last year. And the reason again was that only about 40,000 hectares of our potential 85,000 hectares was planted. In addition to that, we have the power crisis. I went to the president in January this year and told him in emphatic terms that if we didn't address the power situation, it was going to stop our economy in its tracks. And he asked, what's being done about it? He asked me to come back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I found 4 ministers waiting for me, the head of ZEDA, the head of ZERA, and he put to them, this was the Minister of Energy, Minister of Industry and Commerce, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Finance. He put to them, the private sector says, we face a power crisis. What's the plan? There was no plan. There was no plan. And the president turned to Dr. Garter and said to him, well, Sydney, what are you going to do about it? And Sydney said, Mr. President, ZESA does not have the financial capacity to fix this problem. And that is the problem. If you look at Southern Africa as a whole, our utilities are broke. ZESCO in Zambia owes $3.4 billion US. Eskom in South Africa owes nearly $39 billion. That's double the national debt of Zambia. It's 2.5 times the national debt of Zimbabwe. And with the national utilities at this state, where financially they don't have the capacity to invest fundamentally in either infrastructure or in new capacity, what are we going to do? The lead time on a major power station is 5 years. And there are no shortcuts. Dr. Garter called a meeting yesterday of all the solar producers. We've got applications for 7,000 megawatts. We're producing 5. I didn't say 500. I said 5 megawatts with solar. And the problem almost universally is how to fund solar production. It costs $1.2 million to produce a megawatt of power. Our shortage today was 1,300 megawatts. 1,300 megawatts out of 1,800. We produce 500 megawatts today.
Sorry,
And
before you go on.
we've been living in a fool's paradise. I'm just going to finish on that. And these are major structural problems in our economy. Agriculture has always been about 25% of our GDP. 60% of industry is dependent upon agriculture. If we don't get agriculture moving, you can't see real substantial growth going forward. Next year, we are going to be back to importing 70% of our food needs. 70% next year. And this myth of self-sufficiency in agriculture is just not there. And if you look at the power situation, today, Rinka Mine told me they're closing shop. They're closing the mine because they haven't had electricity for 5 days. In Beitbridge, we've got 3 million citrus trees which haven't had water. Guys, face reality. And I think that if we're going to maintain growth in this economy, we all have to get to work. We all have to put our shoulders to the wheel. On the positive side, I think the survey, Madam Chair, provides a very useful indicator. You know, 3 years ago, 95% of the goods in our stores were imported. Today, it's less than 40%. You walk into our stores. I walked into a major supermarket on Saturday, had a bit of time to kill. I wandered around looking. I couldn't find an imported item. That is a complete contrast to what it was 3 years ago. One of the big things about which we didn't understand in the GNU was that dollarization kills industry. And there's not an industrialist in this country that supports dollarization. And right now we are effectively dollarized. Today the PMR rate is over 800. It's approaching 900. Maybe it's exceeded 900 already. This instability, this fiscal, monetary policy has to stop. There's nothing wrong with our balance of payments. The problem is how we're trading the foreign exchange. I go to Zambia, which has 1/3 of our exports, 1/3, with a GDP that's about the same size, and there's no foreign exchange shortage, and the kwacha is not only strong, it's stronger than the rand. What the hell is wrong with us? It's the system. We are the only country in Africa that does not trade foreign exchange conventionally. There's a banker sitting right next to me. He knows exactly what we should be doing. It's not a question that we don't know what to do. We do know what to do. But invested people with interest in the system, making so much money out of this PMR rate and this run that they refuse to let go. And we've got to say no. We've got to put a stop to that. I spent the whole morning this morning. The reason why I wasn't here this morning was I was in negotiations with the Zambians on power imports. They told me 6 days' time they are load shedding South Africa. Do you know what the load shedding this morning in South Africa was? 6. You might as well close the economy down and go and leave early. If we don't solve these problems, we will not be able to achieve our targets for 2030. And that is the harsh reality. There's nothing wrong with our economy. Our economy is doing extremely well. There's nothing wrong with our industry. We are competitive. There's everything wrong with our monetary policy. Everything. And anybody who thinks that the auction is the solution are just deluding themselves. The auction rate is irrelevant. Something like 80% of all foreign exchange is now traded on the informal market. And when the rate gets to, as it did this week, to 900 to 1, which is a third higher than the than the interbank market rate, which is being used by the government, its impact on inflation is immediate. I hate to be, I'm usually the supreme optimist. I really am. But I'm telling you this, we have to wake up. The one thing I've learned as a businessman, never ignore a good crisis. And in this crisis, there are opportunities, both for crooks and for the rest of us.
I wanted to ask you a follow-up question, but I'm not sure if you're going to be brief, Eddie. No, yeah, please be brief.
I'm serving as a pastor, and I sometimes preach in my church. You guys are 40 minutes minimum.
No, I have a follow-up question, but I really need you to be brief because I need to give the panelists equal time to speak. Okay, so you spoke about initially, when you started, you did indicate that you are hopeful of the targets that have been set, and you even said that you are of the opinion that the minister might be downplaying them to some extent, and then you go on to highlight the issues to do with the power issues, etc. So I just wanted us to spotlight the power issues and to say, to what extent, in your opinion, in your assessment, to what extent will the power situation water down these targets that have been set by the minister, that have been set by the Reserve Bank? Very briefly, Eddie.
If we don't get on top of we have applications in ZESA for 2,000 megawatts of new power connections by companies that are already investing in productive capacity. That is going to double our national demand for power in the next 18 months. Our demand for power is growing faster than it's ever grown in our history, indicating that our productive base is growing. Okay? So that's positive. If we can't meet that demand, then that will strangle the growth. So, have we got a plan? Yes, we have. We've booked 1,000 megawatts of power from the new dam at Mpanda Nakua. We've booked that. When it comes on stream, we get 1,000 megawatts. We've gone to the Mozambique government and said, we will build North Bank of Korabasa. We, the Zimbabwe private sector. And they are busy considering our approach. That's 1,200 megawatts. We are launching on Monday 800 megawatts of solar energy, new production. We want to float on the Kariba Dam 1,000 megawatts of solar energy on both sides of the dam wall. 1,000 for Zambia and 1,000 for Zimbabwe. We can increase the productivity of Kariba by 30%. With that investment. We are looking at how do we use our coal resources. We can't ignore our coal resources. Zambia has invested very quietly in a new coal power station at Mamba, financed by the Indians. And I'm told it's magnificent, it's superb, it's clean. You see no emissions. That's what we've got to do. And I think that if we can do all these things, and it is the private sector that's driving this program, it's the private sector that's funding this. And what we've discovered is that we can borrow money where the government can't borrow money. And so we're getting involved in that, and I think we will get onto, I've looked at it very carefully with Dr. Gata. I think we can, by March next year, we can probably start approaching domestic demand. The big challenge now is to grow it, and grow it fast. There's lots of potential, lots of potential. But if we don't do it, Madam Chair, then, quite frankly, even the Minister's conservative estimates for next year are going to be unattainable. We can't run this economy on 500 megawatts of power. You can't run South Africa. I'm really concerned about the stability of South Africa. Load 6. You know what that means? That's 15 hours a day. No electricity.
We are at 20, Eddie.
But we're more than that. You get 4 hours per day to be a domestic consumer. You get 4 hours from about 1 o'clock in the morning until 5. We're trying to keep everybody else alive, but it's very, very difficult.
Thank
We're
you.
going to have a long Christmas holiday.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eddie, for that. So I'll come to Hopewell. You are with COMESA, right? And the issues that have been highlighted by the previous speakers to do with power generation, and obviously as business, we know whenever there is a power issue, it means the cost of production increase. Because you were speaking of solar, others use generators. This is money that's being pumped into that is then being factored into the production cost of any goods and services. So Eddie here was talking about how Zimbabwe has improved in terms of production of these goods, especially when you then look at the issue to do with export. So how competitive, maybe let's say currently, how competitive are the Zimbabwean products on the COMESA market? And how do you foresee them performing in light of this survey that has been put in place and in light of the trading policies that have been highlighted?
Thank you so much. I think first and foremost, I want to share warm greetings from my CEO, Teddy, and my Secretary General, His Excellent Chilesheka Pepe. Coming to the competitiveness of Zimbabwean products in the region, there is high potential. That's what I can say. In terms of Zimbabwe trading with COMESA, yes, the total trade is roughly about 800,000 US dollars, exporting about 437,000 US dollars, importing about 363,000 US dollars. And the structure of export markets are coal, tobacco, those kind of raw products. And also the structure of imports, cement, oil keg, maize, chemicals. So probably going forward, we might need to do heavy investment in value addition so that we are able to be extremely competitive. I think they have been mentioned since morning that we need to have efficient equipment so that we are able to manufacture at a lower cost. But all other fundamentals like the issue of electricity, issue of water also needs to be addressed. I think it's also important to mention that as COMESA Business Council and as COMESA, attending meetings like these is also critical because we have an understanding of what is happening in countries firsthand. The private sector is here. The success of COMESA is dependent on the performance of the private sector. Their ability to export products regionally and internationally is of critical importance. And probably as COMESA Business Council, as COMESA, will thrive to have or to create a good policy environment that enables movement of goods, services, working capital across the region. But to feed into that, the fundamentals at country level, at national level, for the 21 member states needs to be addressed.
What are some of the sticking points? What would you say are some of the sticking points that would need to be addressed?
I think one of the issues is the issue of electricity that is being mentioned, because it adds to the cost of production. Issues of water also needs to be addressed, because it is used as a raw material or used in the production process. So those are some of the issues that needs to be addressed. And I'm also happy that Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce sits on our board, and in January we are also going to have a caucus with other 21 member states to come up with positions that will fit into COMESA. So that's why also we are here as COMESA Business Council and COMESA, so that we build the nations that we admire, to have an Africa that we want.
Would you say that Zimbabwe is ready to be trading maybe in high capacity going forward? I know that the focus of this panel discussion is to look at the outlook, also factoring in the policies that we have as a country. So when you look at the policies that Zimbabwe has, when you put them, juxtapose them with the other policies, trade policies that other countries have, how would you say Zimbabwe is faring? And how then do you think that would impact the way trade would go in the coming year?
Yes, there is a great room for improvement for our country, and also being a Zimbabwean and also attending other meetings in other countries. I was having a discussion with someone during lunch that I was attending a meeting in Malawi for the exporters and importers, and they were kind of complaining with our policies, Malawi being one of the critical trading partners for Zimbabwe. They were kind of complaining, though at first I didn't declare my nationality so that I can also have an understanding of the perception of what other nations think about my country. Then later on, some of the sentiments, they are picked on internet. That's why also it is important to speak positive about our country. Some of the fundamentals that they speak about, they take it from the internet, and sometimes it's not the actual that is happening on the ground. So sometimes when it is said and there's no representative, you can imagine how it will spread. So it's also upon us as nationals of Zimbabwe to speak positive, because it also affects the weight of our products in the region and international. It's based on what people are saying. Even when you are looking for a job and there is another nationality, probably you might be given a second option based on what people are saying. So it's also good to speak positive about our country all the time and try to address those challenges that we have.
So I suppose that's a challenge is at NCC to make sure that this survey also goes viral so that people know exactly what is on the ground and not speculation like what Harpo here is saying. I'll move on to Fanmo. Fanmo, he is with First Capital Bank. He's the Chief Finance Officer. We had the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank here earlier in the morning where he spoke about different issues. And he said that as a Reserve Bank, they are pleased with the performance of companies in this past year, which he says is testament to the country, the economy improving, is growing. I mean, you are the finance guy. I'm sure you deal with these numbers every day. Would you attest to this?
Right. So, good afternoon, colleagues, and thanks very much, Melissa. I think in this environment, it's really quite a difficult conversation for you to actually speak to to performance of companies, given the background of the high inflation that we've got, and also other distortions that we see existing in the monetary system. But I would imagine that a lot of companies, certainly going by the trend we saw at half year, will probably be reporting improved profitability in historical terms, of course. But I think quite a number of them will report about that improved profitability against the background of reduced volumes of sales. And what that does is that it raises quite a few persons. Some of that profitability is obviously anchored on perhaps the increased capacity utilization that we saw being spoken to earlier. But I think there are instances or perhaps areas that would, for me, be a cause for concern as to the sustainability of the profitability that is reported. One is the fact that quite a bit of that profitability is potentially arising from currency arbitrage that is rampant on the market. And I think ATE speaks to the FX management regime that we are operating under. And I think I would agree with him it's not a very optimal system that we've got. And I
Reporting in
think
progress.
some players have achieved growth in profitability as a result of that. There is also potentially passive income that is going to be reported in the form of just reevaluation of portfolios. Part of that could be the reevaluation of the FX positions that institutions have in their book. And part of it could just be reevaluation of investments that's not actually anchored on fundamentals supporting those investments. And I think that is a cause for concern. Part of the profitability is also perhaps arising out of the fact that for the greater part of the year, those that geared their balance sheets would have paid a cost in the form of interest expense at a rate that was much lower than the inflation out there. And naturally, I think if you looked at the survey, one of the factors that is attributed to the increased capacity utilization is access to capital. I would imagine that that access is probably speaking to debt capital and not so much equity, because we haven't seen a lot of that happening on the market in any event. And I think that opportunity as we go forward with lower interest rates is a matter that puts sustainability in question. But again, over and above that, there's also been generally within the private sector a pricing regime that is quite aggressive and perhaps very difficult to sustain when you look into the outlook period. So I think just maybe...
When you say aggressive, what do you mean, Fano?
All right, so what I mean is this. Let me give you perhaps by way of an example. So I like to frame pictures, certificates and things like that. Across the border in South Africa, I buy a frame for, say, 100 rands, very beautiful frame. Same frame across here in Zimbabwe, I would be lucky to pay anything below $50, right? And what that means is that there is actually pricing practices within our businesses that actually is quite aggressive and potentially may not be sustainable going into the future. So I think what the governor speaks to is a trend born out of the factors that I've just mentioned. The real question for me is probably around whether that performance is actually sustainable if we look forward to 2023 and beyond. And I suspect that's where we begin to have a bit of a challenge. Why I say so is because if you look at the monetary policy signals that we get from the authorities, it speaks to an aggressive approach towards inflation management.
So everyone is aggressive, the market is aggressive, the monetary policy is aggressive.
and they also speak to trying to deal with the monetary distortions that exist. They've, to a large extent, started that journey with, for instance, increasing the policy rate, where we now are lending to corporates at rates above 200% and to individuals at rates above 100%. Now, this issue of sustaining real interest rates obviously creates a dynamic for corporates quite different to what existed at the beginning of the year. It actually means that the model of business that a lot of corporates have operated under during 2022 may not be sustainable in 2023. I mean, let me just give that as an example. There are a few other policy matters that are